For 10 long years, the Greek army sat camped outside the walls of Troy, completely unable to breach the city. The siege only ended because a Greek king named Odysseus came up with a brilliant idea: build a giant wooden horse, hide elite soldiers inside, and leave it at the gates as a departing gift. The Trojans dragged it inside, and by morning, the city was burned to the ground. Odysseus was a certified tactical genius, leaving these ruins behind as a victorious hero. He set sail for his home island of Ithaca with 12 ships, over 600 men, and plenty of plundered treasure. The voyage across the Aegean Sea should have taken about 2 weeks. It took 10 years, and out of those 600 men, exactly 0 of them made it home. Odysseus triggered this decade of disaster through a single catastrophic failure of character. He survived 10 years of brutal warfare, only to dismantle his own victory by letting his monumental ego override his intellect. The defining mistake of his life happens early in the trip. Odysseus and a scouting party get trapped inside a cave by a one-eyed giant named Polyphemus, who promptly starts eating the crew raw. Odysseus knows he can't kill the giant, because then no one could move the massive boulder blocking the exit. Instead, he gets the monster drunk, introduces himself as nobody, and waits for the giant to pass out. Then his men drive a massive, heated olive stake straight into the creature's eye. When Polyphemus screams for help, the other giants rush over, asking who is hurting him. He yells back, "Nobody is hurting me." The other giants tell him to go back to sleep. The next morning, the blinded giant rolls the boulder aside to let his sheep out to graze. He runs his hands over the back of every sheep to make sure no humans are riding them. Odysseus and his surviving men strap themselves flush to the bellies of the animals, escaping right under the monster's fingertips. They make it back to the ships. They are entirely safe. Poseidon, the god of the sea and father of the Cyclops, has no idea who blinded his son. All Odysseus has to do is sail away. Instead, as the ship pulls away from the shore, he stands up and shouts back at the bleeding monster. He yells out his true name. He lists his father's name. He declares himself the King of Ithaca. He wanted the credit. By refusing to remain anonymous, Odysseus arms the giant with the exact coordinates required for a divine hit. Polyphemus immediately prays to Poseidon, asking him to curse Odysseus by name. Poseidon grants the prayer, and the ocean itself turns into a hostile trap. Once the curse takes hold, the trust between the captain and his crew begins to rot. A friendly king gifts Odysseus a leather bag containing all the dangerous winds of the world, leaving only a gentle breeze to push them straight home. But his men assume he is hoarding gold. While Odysseus sleeps, literally within sight of their home island, the crew rips the bag open. The exploding winds blast all 12 ships entirely across the sea. This chart tracks the rapid collapse of his forces following that loss of trust. The command structure splinters further when they sail into an unfamiliar harbor populated by giant Laestrygonians. The giants ambush the fleet from the cliffs, spearing the men and hurling boulders down onto the decks. 11 out of 12 ships are destroyed instantly. Over 500 men die. Looking at this remaining data point, things somehow get worse for the sole surviving crew. They wash up on the island of the witch goddess Circe. She invites a scouting party in for a feast, taps them with a magical wand, and turns every single one of them into pigs. Even after Odysseus rescues his men from the witch, their discipline is gone. Stranded on an island and starving, the crew completely ignores Odysseus's strict orders and slaughters the sacred cattle of the sun god Helios. Once they set sail, Zeus drops a thunderbolt directly onto the vessel, splitting it in half. Every man drowns. Only Odysseus survives, washing up entirely alone. Odysseus's boast in the cave initiated a targeted divine curse. Every subsequent disaster, from the loss of trust to the final shipwreck, followed a direct chain of causality triggered by that single moment of pride. 20 years after he left for war, Odysseus finally returns to Ithaca, but because of the curse, he doesn't arrive as a conquering hero. The goddess Athena disguises him as a frail, rotting beggar so he can slip onto his own island unrecognized. He walks into a nightmare. Over 100 hostile men from the surrounding islands have occupied his palace. Believing the king is dead, they are slaughtering his livestock, draining his wine cellars, and aggressively trying to force his wife Penelope into marriage. When the disguised king walks through his own gates, the intruders mock him and hurl furniture at his head. A younger Odysseus would have snapped. He would have screamed his name, listed his titles, and demanded their obedience. Instead, he stays completely silent. He takes the abuse, watches their movements, and maps out the room. This calculated silence is the direct inverse of his failure on the rocking boat outside the Cyclops cave. A decade of starvation, drownings, and sheer humiliation has finally taught him emotional discipline. Penelope announces a contest. She will marry whoever can string her husband's massive war bow and shoot an arrow through a dozen axe heads. One by one, the arrogant suitors try to bend the wood, and one by one, they fail entirely. The old beggar asks for a turn. Amidst their laughter, he effortlessly strings it. He fires a perfect shot through the axes, turns the weapon on the crowd, and alongside his son, executes all 108 men in the room. The palace is secure, but Penelope requires proof that this violent stranger is actually her husband. She sets a final trap, ordering her servants to move the king's heavy wooden bed out of their bedroom for the guest. Odysseus doesn't boast about his victories to prove his identity. He simply states a quiet fact: the bed cannot be moved. He built it himself, carving one of the bedposts directly out of a living olive tree that is still rooted deep in the soil beneath the palace floor. The Odyssey demonstrates that raw intelligence is a dangerous liability without emotional discipline. Odysseus finally mastered the smartest move available to any leader: keeping his mouth shut.